This is the Viltrox 75mm f1.2, a bokeh APS-C lens for the Fuji XT5. In this video, I'm going to break down how I took these two portraits using this combo along with that Westcott FJ400 strobe. The gear that I was using for these photos was the Fuji XT5 as my main camera. Now, I know I might get some questions. Well, Eli, weren't you shooting Canon? Weren't you shooting Sony? Are you switching? What's up with this? I just love photography, guys. I love using multiple brands, so I just added Fuji into my arsenal. And what I love about the Fuji XT5 is that it's brought back a lot of my love into why I got into photography. A lot of the film simulations has forced me to do photos that I wouldn't have otherwise done with my Sony and my Canon. So I've just been having a lot of fun with this camera, and I don't really anticipate using it a lot for portraits. Every once in a while, I'll throw it in there. But on this photo shoot, I believe this was one of my first photo shoots that I did with my Fuji XT5. Now, one of the reasons why I used it was because I used the Viltrox 75mm. Now, this lens is basically a 112.5mm full frame equivalent because it's an APS-C lens, but Viltrox did send me this lens, I don't know, maybe 5-6 months ago. I think it was back in August, I believe, when it first came out. So I was super excited because I wanted to see the quality of what I could get with a $500-ish lens. I'll put the price up here on how much this lens cost, but I was excited to try it out because I've never really done a photo shoot with the Fuji using a third-party lens. I wanted to see what I could basically come up with. Now, along with that, I was using the Westcott FJ400 strobe. That's my do-it-all strobe. That's the strobe that I mainly take when I'm doing outdoor portraits if I'm not using the FJ200, along with the Westcott FJ-X3M, which is cool because, it's different brand compatible and it's compatible with the Fuji XT5. Now, one of the things that was a little bit unique about the gear for this is I was using a Strobe Pro Stand, and I'll have the proper name and the dimensions up here on the screen. And what makes this stand unique over some of the other stands that I use is that the fact that it has these extendable legs. And why this is important is, well, I'm from South Texas. Here, it gets very windy, and sometimes I don't have an assistant, or if I do have an assistant, sometimes I might have them recording video for me, or, sometimes we're both shooting together. And so sometimes it's difficult to always have somebody holding the stand. Now, I know I can use weights, and I've used them before, but sometimes, when I'm shooting, we're kind of moving fast and on the go, and these extendable legs basically allow me to get this strong foundation so that the modifier and the light doesn't tip over. So I'll have some footage here of different shoots where I'm using it, and every time I post about it on Instagram, I usually get that common question. It's like, hey, what stand is that? What stand is that? What stand is that? Because it's a very unique stand, to say the least. Now that we've talked about the gear, let's go ahead and break down the first photograph. Now, when it comes to high-speed sync and golden hour, these work great. They're like PB&J. They work fantastic with one another. So whenever I'm doing my portrait sessions, I usually try to set them up so that I can get that beautiful golden hour. Now, here in South Texas, sometimes we'll get these beautiful, dramatic, colorful skies, and sometimes they'll be a little bit boring and plain. It really just depends on the day. Now, I did get lucky on this specific day because we got a beautiful golden hour sunset for these shots. Now, whenever I'm doing my high-speed sync work, I usually have a simple workflow, and that is setting my ISO and my aperture first. So in this case, I'm using my Viltrox 75mm f1.2, and I wanted to see what kind of bokeh quality I could get, so I set it to f1.2. Then I set my ISO to 125 on my Fuji XT5 because that is my base ISO. Now, if I was shooting with my Canon or if I was shooting with my Sony, that would have been 100. Now, going back to aperture, keep in mind you don't have to always go for those shallow depth of field portraits. You could definitely use f4 and 5.6, and that's actually usually my go-to when I'm doing my client work. When I'm doing my client work, I like to show off the location a little bit more instead of just blurring everything out into smithereens. So I just wanted to be very clear on that. I definitely just wanted to see what bokeh quality I could get with this lens. Now, once you have those two parameters set up in your camera, now once again, you might have aperture f2.8 if you have a 24-70 or a 7200, doesn't matter. Set that first, set your ISO, and then the last ingredient is going to be that shutter speed. Now, the shutter speed is the secret ingredient here, guys, to get the ambient exposure that you want on your background. Now, we haven't got into the flash yet, so right now what you want to do is adjust your shutter speed, and by making your shutter speed faster, that is going to darken your background, and decreasing and slowing down your shutter speed, that is going to let in more ambient and make your image brighter. Now, the tricky part is that this answer is going to be different depending on the scenario that you're at, depending on your ambient at your specific time. If you have clouds, is it golden hour? Everybody's answer is going to be different. And so usually my first step is to get my ambient exposure. And that's what you see here, me getting a photograph without any flash, just seeing what kind of background I want in the photograph. Once I have my ambient exposure, this is now where I add my flash. And in this case, I was using the FJ400 with the Manny Ortiz Beauty Dish. And the reason why I love the Manny Ortiz Beauty Dish is that it's big enough to add enough spread of light over the subject. And it gives me that beautiful soft light and hard light mix perfectly blended. One tip when you're trying to figure out the power output of your strobe, whether you're using Westcott or Godox or any brand, is if you're doing high-speed sync and you know you're doing golden hour, and in this case, my ambient exposure was ISO 125, 5000 on my shutter speed, and f1.2. The higher the shutter speed when I'm doing high-speed sync usually means you're better off starting off at the higher power output. So a safe number to start off, if you're using Westcott, is going to be power 6. And if you're using Godox, that would be power 1/4. And at that point, that way you're spending less time fiddling around with your settings. So take a test shot at that power output and see if the subject is dark, then just increase your power output. And if they're too bright, just go ahead and bring that power down. So if I'm shooting outdoors, in other words, and I'm doing golden hour, there's no way that I'm going to be starting at power 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'm just wasting my time. I know I'm not going to get enough power there. And so I'm definitely going to start off at power 6 or 1/4 once again. And then from there, figure out, do I need more power or less power? And I'm not fiddling around with my camera settings anymore. I'm simply going to my trigger and I'm adjusting and figuring out how much power and the balance that I need. Once you have your ambient exposure and your flash power set up, I do want to show you a little bit of the shots that I got as I was progressing through this. Now, one of the things that I want to focus on is the composition and pose. That's also very crucial, guys. Yes, getting the ambient exposure and all that stuff is easy and getting all that. But if you don't have a pose that makes your subject look good, then you're really not going to get a good final outcome. So what really inspired me to do this photograph was the fact that we had those leading lines from the bridge, and I knew that I wanted that in my composition. If I look at the face here, you'll see that's a little bit too bright. That's where I would have brought down the power of my strobe, which I did here. Now, as we progress, you'll see that we got a beautiful dramatic sky. This is what we kind of dream of when we're shooting high-speed sync, is hoping that we get something beautiful like this. So whenever we have this typically means we have about 5 to 10 minutes to work with this before it's completely gone. And one of the final shots that I got as I was progressing through this is that something to keep in mind, Ashley did bring a cowboy hat. And whenever you have that, you know that it's going to block some of the light on the face. And so typically what I'll have them do is lift up their chin, and that's what you're going to see me do there. She lifts up her chin. And then eventually, because I felt like I was looking too far up her chin, I had her look towards the light. And so that helped out the photo there. Now, this is one of the final photos that we're going to look at. I'll show you what the final outcome looks like in Capture One and Photoshop. But as you can see here, I did get a little bit of my friend Marco's nalgas, his nalguitas got in the shot, but it's okay. That's why we have Photoshop generative fill to go in there and help us out. So yeah, I just wanted to show you a little bit of the progression of this photo. And so, as you can see, just trying to get as many different poses as possible because, as you know, the sun was going to come down super duper fast. Now, I'm curious, guys, let me know in the comment section, which one did you like better though? Because I do have a full body shot And then I went in for a little bit more of a close-up, just to get a little bit more of that depth of field. I see that the sunset gets a little bit more dramatic. I don't know. I can't make up my mind. I love both of them. I don't know. Let me know in the comments. I would really appreciate it, because this is where, as a photographer, I stress out which photo to post on Instagram, which one to edit. And so I would just value your feedback on that. Now let's take a look at what I did at the raw level in Capture One. If I push Y on the keyboard, this is the before and then the after. Now, like I mentioned, when you're shooting golden hour, you are going to get a lot of these silhouettes. So I usually find myself bringing up the blacks and the shadows. Now, if I look at the individual layers here, let's quickly look at this. And if you want to know how to use Capture One, I do have tutorials, and I would love for you to subscribe and take a look at those. So I have my base layer, which I always start off with, and that is bringing up those blacks and those shadows. Then I go into my color grading and I tweak the colors ever so slightly. Then I did my dodge, which was right on my face, which right here you can see in green is where I dodged. I did a little iris enhance on the eyes, bringing out the eyes a little bit, and then added a sky mask to bring out those blues. Then in Photoshop, I added a Photoshop generative fill to get Marco's nalguitas out of there. Now let me bring out those layers over here. There we go. And so if we look at my layers, you'll see that this is my frequency separation in dodge and burn. Let me zoom in here. If you would love to learn more about how I do my Photoshop and skin retouching, I do have video specifically about that. And I do have some full edits, by the way. So that's kind of the skin there, what I did. Then I also did my color with selective color and gradient maps, and then finalized it with some final tweaks for exposure. And this is the overall before and after in Photoshop. If you guys enjoyed this, there are plenty of other videos, and I'm going to leave you off with a full edit tutorial. Thank you guys for watching. You guys have a beautiful weekend, and I will see you on the next one.